The Arizona sun beat down on Fort Huachuca like a hammer on an anvil. Staff Sergeant Rachel Torres wiped the sweat from her forehead as she wheeled another ammunition cart across the tarmac. The Apache helicopter loomed above her, its shadow offering brief relief from the 100-degree heat. "Hey, sweetheart, you sure you can handle that?" Captain Derek Mason called down from the cockpit, his voice dripping with condescension. "Those boxes look pretty heavy for someone your size." Rachel didn't look up. She'd heard it all before. At 5'4" and 120 pounds, she didn't fit the image most people had of a munitions specialist. But she'd been loading weapons systems for 8 years, and she knew her job better than most men twice her size. "I've got it, sir," she said flatly, continuing her work with practiced efficiency. Mason laughed and nudged his co-pilot, Lieutenant Barnes. "They'll let anyone do anything these days, won't they?" Rachel's jaw tightened, but she kept loading. Each round had to be positioned perfectly. One mistake could cost lives. She wouldn't give Mason the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. This was her life now. Ever since transferring to Fort Huachuca 6 months ago, she'd faced constant doubt. The men in her unit treated her like a secretary who'd wandered onto the flight line by mistake. They gave her the worst shifts, the hardest details, and never missed a chance to question her abilities. What they didn't know could fill a book. Rachel had grown up in a small town in New Mexico, the daughter of a single mother who cleaned houses for a living. She joined the Army at 18 with nothing but determination and a need to prove she was more than her circumstances. The military had given her purpose, discipline, and skills that most people would never know she possessed. As she locked the ammunition bay and began her safety check, Major Collins approached. He was the operations officer, a stern man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and a permanent scowl. "Torres," he barked, "you're taking too long. We've got a training exercise in 30 minutes." "Just finishing the safety protocol, sir," Rachel replied calmly. "Well, finish faster. We can't wait around all day while you figure things out." Rachel bit back her response. She'd completed the loading in record time, as usual, but Collins never acknowledged her efficiency. To him, she was just a diversity checkbox, a political appointment that real soldiers had to work around. She signed off on the checklist and stepped back as the Apache's engines began to whine. Mason gave her a mocking salute through the cockpit window before the helicopter lifted off, its rotors kicking up dust and debris. Rachel watched it climb into the pale blue sky, then turned back to her duties. She had 3 more helicopters to load before the day was done. The afternoon dragged on. The other munitions specialists, all men, gathered in the shade during their break, talking and laughing. Rachel sat apart, drinking water and reviewing technical manuals on her tablet. She'd learned not to try to join them. The few times she had, the conversation died, and they drifted away like she carried some contagious disease. "You ever wonder why she's really here?" she heard Corporal Stevens mutter, not quite quiet enough. "Probably slept with someone to get the posting," another voice replied. "No way she passed the qualifications on her own." Rachel's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her eyes on her screen. She'd heard worse, much worse. In her first unit, someone had put a bra in her locker with a note saying she should stick to what she was good for. She'd reported it, and nothing had happened except that the harassment got worse. So she'd stopped reporting. She'd stopped expecting fairness. She just did her job better than anyone else and waited for the day when that would be enough. That evening, back in her quarters, Rachel stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at herself. At the woman she'd become. Strong, competent, invisible. She pulled off her uniform shirt and turned slightly, examining the tattoo on her left shoulder blade. Most people who saw it thought it was just a decorative design, a phoenix rising from flames, beautifully detailed in red and gold ink. They had no idea what it really meant. Only a handful of people in the world knew the truth about that tattoo. And if Rachel had her way, No one at Fort Huachuca would ever find out. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Saw you got another commendation. So proud of you, Mija. When are you coming home? Rachel smiled sadly. She couldn't tell her mother that the commendation had been filed away without ceremony, that her commanding officer had barely glanced at it. Her mother thought the army respected her daughter. Rachel didn't have the heart to shatter that illusion. She typed back, "Soon, Mom, love you." The next morning brought the same routine. Same heat, same helicopters, same casual disrespect. Rachel was loading ammunition on Apache 7-3 when Captain Mason returned from a maintenance flight. "Tors," he shouted, still in the cockpit. "Get up here, radio's acting up, need you to check something." Rachel frowned. Radio maintenance wasn't her job, but she grabbed her toolkit and climbed the access ladder. Mason had already unbuckled and was pointing at the communications panel. "There," he said, "keeps cutting out." Rachel squeezed into the tight space, her back to Mason as she examined the wiring. She had to remove her outer shirt in the cramped heat, leaving only her tan t-shirt. That's when everything changed. "Holy," Mason's voice cut off abruptly. Rachel turned to find him staring at her shoulder blade, his face pale as bone. His eyes were locked on her tattoo, and the cocky arrogance had vanished completely. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. Rachel's blood ran cold. She quickly pulled her shirt back on, but the damage was done. Mason had seen it. He'd recognized it. "Captain, I..." "Don't." Mason held up a hand, his voice shaking. "Don't say anything, not here." He climbed down from the cockpit like a man in a daze, then turned back to her. The mockery was gone from his eyes, replaced by something Rachel had never seen directed at her before: fear and respect. "My office, 20 minutes, that's an order." Rachel watched him walk away, her heart pounding. In 8 years of keeping her secret, no one had ever recognized the tattoo. She'd been so careful, but Mason knew. Somehow he knew. 20 minutes later, Rachel stood at attention in Mason's office. He'd closed the door and drawn the blinds, something he never did. "At ease," he said quietly. "Please sit down." Rachel sat, confused by his tone. This wasn't the arrogant pilot who'd mocked her yesterday. This was a different man entirely. Mason ran a hand through his hair. "Staff Sergeant Tors, Rachel, I owe you an apology." "A massive apology." "Sir, I don't understand." "That tattoo," Mason said. "I saw it once before, 6 years ago, on a woman who saved my life in Syria." Rachel's chest tightened. "I was flying a reconnaissance mission," Mason continued, his voice distant with memory. "We got hit by enemy fire, went down hard in hostile territory. My co-pilot was dead. I was trapped in the wreckage with a broken leg and 2 broken ribs. I knew I was finished." He looked directly at Rachel now. "Then she appeared, like a ghost, pulled me out of that burning cockpit, carried me half a mile through enemy fire to an extraction point, never said a word. She had this tattoo on her shoulder blade, a phoenix. I asked her about it later in the medical tent. She said it was the mark of her unit, a classified unit. Then she disappeared and I never saw her again." Rachel's silence confirmed everything. "That was you," Mason breathed. "You were the one who saved me." "No, sir," Rachel said carefully. "That wasn't me, but I know who you're talking about." Mason's eyes narrowed slightly, then understanding dawned. "Of course, you can't confirm or deny." Rachel remained silent. "The woman who saved me," Mason continued, "she was part of something special, something that doesn't officially exist, and that tattoo is how they recognize each other, isn't it?" "Captain Mason, with all due respect, I can't discuss." "I understand." Mason stood abruptly, then did something that shocked Rachel to her core. He stood at attention and saluted her. "I've been treating a genuine hero like she was incompetent. I've been..." His voice broke slightly. "I've been dishonoring the woman who saved my life by dishonoring you." "Sir, you don't need to." Yes, I do. Mason lowered his salute. I'm calling Major Collins. We're having a meeting today. Captain, please don't. If you draw attention to this. I won't mention the tattoo or anything classified, Mason assured her. But I will be mentioning your service record, because after you left I pulled it up. Do you know what I found? Rachel said nothing. 3 Army Commendation Medals, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, commendations from commanders I've never heard of, service in places that aren't officially listed, and all of it buried so deep that I had to use my security clearance just to scratch the surface. He shook his head in disbelief. You're one of the most decorated soldiers on this base, and you've been loading ammunition while men like me mock you. Within an hour, Rachel found herself in Major Collins' office with Captain Mason. Collins looked irritated at the interruption. This better be important, Captain. It is, sir. I need to discuss Staff Sergeant Tor's duty assignment. Collins frowned. What about it? She's overqualified for munitions loading, sir. Significantly overqualified. Captain Mason, I don't have time for. Sir, have you actually read her service record? Her full service record? Collins hesitated. I've reviewed her file. All of it, sir, including the classified sections. The Major's expression shifted slightly. He pulled up Rachel's file on his computer, then began clicking deeper. His face grew pale as he read. My God, he muttered, I had no idea. None of us did, sir, because Staff Sergeant Tors never mentioned it. She just did her job, took our abuse, and never said a word. Collins looked at Rachel with new eyes. Why didn't you tell anyone? It's not my way, sir, Rachel said simply. I do what I'm assigned. I don't ask for special treatment. Special treatment? Collins stood up. Sergeant, you've been doing work beneath your skill level for 6 months. That's not special treatment. That's a waste of a valuable asset. He turned to his computer and began typing rapidly. Effective immediately, you're being reassigned. I'm putting you in charge of advanced weapons systems training. You'll be supervising the munitions specialists, not working alongside them. Sir, that's not necessary. It's absolutely necessary. Collins' voice was firm. And Sergeant, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on prejudices I didn't even know I had. That stops now. Over the following weeks, word spread quietly through the base. Not about the classified operations, that remained secret, but about Rachel's true qualifications. The men who'd mocked her suddenly found themselves in her training classes, learning from the woman they'd dismissed. Rachel taught them well. She was patient, thorough, and fair. But she was also exacting, accepting nothing less than perfection. The soldiers who doubted her ability now saw firsthand just how much she knew, how much experience she carried. Captain Mason became one of her strongest advocates. He never mentioned Syria, never spoke of how he knew what he knew. But his respect was obvious, and it influenced others. 3 months after the incident with the tattoo, Rachel was promoted to Sergeant First Class. At the ceremony, Major Collins presented her award in front of the entire unit. This soldier, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled ranks, represents the best of what we can be. She served in silence, excelled without recognition, and remained professional in the face of doubt. She is what every one of us should aspire to become. The applause was genuine. Even Corporal Stevens, who'd once questioned why she was there, clapped with respect. That evening, Rachel video-called her mother. Mija, I heard about your promotion. Tell me everything. Rachel smiled. There's not much to tell, Mom, just doing my job. Just doing your job, her mother repeated with a knowing laugh. That's what you always say, but I know better. I know my daughter. After the call ended, Rachel stood once more in front of her mirror, looking at the phoenix on her shoulder blade. The symbol of rising from ashes, of rebirth through fire. For years, she'd hidden what it meant. She'd let people underestimate her, mock her, dismiss her. Not because she was weak, but because the mission always mattered more than her pride. But now things were different, not because of the promotion or the recognition, but because she'd learned something important. Sometimes being seen for who you truly are isn't a weakness. Sometimes it's the only way to inspire others to be better than they are. Rachel pulled on her new uniform, the additional stripe gleaming on her sleeve. Tomorrow she'd continue teaching, continue serving, continue being the soldier she'd always been. The difference was that now, finally, people were ready to see her.